collusion, right, at minimum. Now, we've seen this weird shift on the left, too, because we've also seen the left radically support big pharma, which is definitely not something I ever thought I would see in my lifetime. It's so utterly preposterous. But independent of the other risks that the war presents, the risk of dumping $113 billion into the hands of the corporate part of the military-industrial complex, you'd think would be something that would raise the hackles of, let's say, people like AOC and Bernie Sanders. And as you said, there's been radio silence on that front, or perhaps even the opposite of that, like full-fledged support for the brave Ukrainian Democrats and those on the side of democracy in Ukraine, let's say. So that seems a bit preposterous. Now, you and I also talked about the fact that there are material risks in the escalation of this war to the integrity of the American state. You know, you're not a big government advocate, and anytime there is a war, what you generally see is not only a tremendous amount of tax money dumped into the hands of the corporate side of the military-industrial complex, but a huge growth in government bureaucracy and overreach that's very seldom rolled back. So what do you see unfolding as a danger on that front?
The modern nation state, by necessity, when it fights wars, it necessarily needs to consolidate as much power as possible. And so that concentration of power tends to cause the government to become larger, taxes to be more intrusive. And I can use the word taxes here broadly because in the United States, the way we finance our government, more government spending ends up producing a backdoor invisible tax because we've just been inflating our currency. And people are making the same amount of money, but it buys less. And once that happens in order to fund a war, when the war ends, to the degree it ends, government tends not to recede. The taxes tend to be in place, at least for quite a while. And the general levels of government funding might retreat some, but never do they return to pre-war levels. There was a Harvard professor named Roger Porter who wrote a book about this about 30 years ago called War and the Rise of the State. And I think we're seeing it on display. So, yeah, that is another concern, is that as we do these things, we become accustomed to spending this much money for Ukraine, some of which is funneled through this or that entity within the State Department or the USAID program or some other program through the Department of Defense. Some of those funding levels might go down, but I doubt they will ever retreat to the levels where they were prior to this particular conflict. And that's a deep concern. It might also explain why some progressives are more inclined to be supportive of this, along with the fact that it happens to be their president, a Democrat, who's in office at the time. If this were Trump doing this, I can only imagine there'd be, many of them at least, would be calling bloody horror over it.